Welcome, everyone. I'm really pleased to be here this evening or this morning or the middle of the night, wherever you are, to welcome you to our program, Shaping the Future of Security on the Korean Peninsula. And I'm really especially pleased that the discussion tonight is going to be hosted by not only Susan Thornton, who is the moderator of tonight, but our next generation Korean Peninsula specialists, the 2024 cohort. This is a program that the National Committee has had for the past few years, and every year the groups of cohorts keep getting better. But we've been so impressed with the work that they've done, the policy papers that they've written, that we wanted them to share kind of their perspectives, the next generation perspectives, with all of you this evening. So I'm really looking forward to the discussion. So I won't say much more other than I'm Susan Elliott, and I'm the President and CEO of the National Committee on American Foreign Policy. And I'm really delighted that we can host this event tonight. And I'm going to turn the program over to Susan Thornton, who probably most of you know. She's the director of our Forum on Asia-Pacific Security here at the National Committee. She's a former U.S. diplomat, having had a very distinguished career focused mainly on the Asia-Pacific, but also on Russia and other countries of former Soviet Union. And as well, she's also a professor at Yale Law School and does many other things that make her a really fantastic member of our team. So I'm going to turn the program over now to Susan, and I would just like to say that we really thank the Korea Foundation for funding this program, because without their strong and continuing support, we wouldn't be able to do the work we do. So thanks to everyone for being here tonight. I look forward to a great discussion, and I'll turn the program now over to Susan Thornton.
Great. Thank you so much, Susan. And thanks to all of our participants for being here and all of our attendees. I see a number of our previous cohort members and some of our mentors for this program, and those people and all of our supporters for this program have been really key to setting our emerging Korean Peninsula leaders on the way to building their profiles and their policy-making skills. So I really want to thank all of you. Tonight, we're going to start off a moderated conversation on all issues Korean Peninsula. We have, in particular, 3 of our emerging leaders that are going to share their thoughts with us. First, we have Chelsea Alexander. Chelsea is a policy program officer at the Korea Society in New York. And prior to that, Chelsea did a Fulbright program at Korea University, and she studied, very interesting topic, how middle powers have been involved in the Korean peace process. So Chelsea, great to have you with us tonight. We also have Yeren Yoon. Yeren is a candidate at the Fletcher School, Tufts University. She is also a surface warfare officer from the Korean Navy and graduated from the Korean Naval Academy. And she has also worked previously at the Korean National Diplomatic Academy doing research. Welcome, Yeren. She's coming to us from the Boston area. And last but not least, of our initial 3 discussants, we have Caroline Kearney. Caroline is a PhD candidate. She's coming to us tonight from Seoul, where she is earning her degree at Yonsei University. Prior to that, Caroline has also worked in a number of organizations on Korean Peninsula peace processes and other issues. She's written articles in The Diplomat, etc. So it's good to have all of you with us tonight. And I'd just like to maybe kick off the conversation. Caroline, you're there in Seoul. There is an awful lot going on the Korean Peninsula in U.S.-Korea relations and in the Asia-Pacific relations with the United States, as we know. Now, over the past weekend, the focus was on Europe at the Munich Security Conference. But at Munich, our new Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, did meet with the current Korean Foreign Minister, Minister Cho, and also with the Japanese Foreign Minister Iwaya, and they issued a trilateral joint statement. So this would seem to be very promising, but I wonder if you can just talk us through a little bit how you're seeing things on the ground there in Seoul at the moment. Of course, we still have a domestic political crisis of sorts unfolding, and it's not really clear how that is going to, uh, turn out and what the implications of that might be for the U.S. ROK alliance. But if you could just share with us a little bit how you're seeing U.S. ROK relations from Seoul at the moment.
So yes, I would say they're quite in flux right now with the um, most recently elected president Yoon Suk Yeol undergoing an impeachment trial. We have to wait until those results come out, and then there will be a new presidential election, likely, assuming he is in fact impeached. There will be a new election in South Korea in the next 2 months following that. So we're looking at another presidential election in the next 3 months. It's hard to trust polls, but it's seeming like Lee Jae-myung of the Democratic Party may win. That process still hasn't even started yet, so anything could happen. It's completely in the air. So this is quite difficult for U.S. ROK relations to move forward. Even though Trump was just reelected, this is the time. That's not so possible right now with so much uncertainty in the air. So um, my strongest advice would be for both the Democratic and the People's Power Party in South Korea to have their policies ready. So as soon as one of their candidates is elected, they can start engaging the U.S. From day one and move forward, because this is a bit of this slows things down and makes things a bit more complicated because we just don't know.
So Chelsea, let me ask you, because I think you, like we at the National Committee, met up with a bipartisan delegation last week from Korea, from the National Assembly. This National Assembly delegation was sent to sort of talk to Americans about how things are going on with the political process in Korea, to show that there is institutional kind of norms being upheld and that things are smooth. But, as Caroline mentions, this does kind of throw a monkey wrench into how to, make U.S. Korea relations proceed along the track with our new president. You see all kinds of countries already meeting with Donald Trump, but it's going to be difficult for Korea to move in that direction until the rest of this domestic process is straightened out, is it not?
I think that's completely right. I think you and Caroline are both touching on the biggest wrench right now in US-Korea relations. But I think what a main priority or concern is ensuring ROK trust in the United States even throughout this time. I think the Biden administration spent considerable time and effort in shoring up trust in the US extended deterrent. And I mean, through the Camp David Accords, the Nuclear Consultative Group, and I think a major concern is if the ROK's trust in the US is eroded, that might spark greater calls in Korea for more seriously considering developing an indigenous nuclear deterrent to address security concerns. There's exacerbation of arms crisis. So I think there are other aspects to this that are of concern, and that the US can really take a role in trying to shore up trust with our ally, even during this time of flux.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you raised that. I saw an article today that said that the Democratic Party in Korea started a new security committee, and that this issue came up at their very first meeting. I don't know, Yeren, it would be great for you to get in on this discussion. I see that the U.S. Administration, particularly Marco Rubio, Secretary of State, has been making a pretty big effort to talk about shoring up the U.S. deterrence posture with the ROK, talked about continuing to develop the deterrence security group that had been developed under the Biden administration. And I wonder if you think those efforts are having a reassuring effect?
Well, for starters, South Korea, as we all are aware of it, South Korea is in the progress of impeachment against President Yoon. we all guess that it should be completed by March, at least at the latest by April. Even if progress as planned, it should be the next president election will be taken within 6 days, which means huge political turbulence and domestic chaos in South Korea. In addition to this, President Trump was mentioned that the possibility of withdrawing of USFK and so on. So for South Korean government is very hard position to dealing with the possibility and the US South Korea military alliance and while addressing the North Korean threats as well. So it's very, very tricky, challenging time for South Korean government and military as well.
Yeah, I did see that, that President Trump's made a couple of comments also, of course, about North Korea. And these have been picked up also in the ROK. And I think there's quite a bit of concern about some of the angles that have been mentioned. There was a comment by President Trump, I think, about, saying something about recognizing that North Korea has nuclear weapons. But I don't think that really is tantamount to a recognition of North Korea as a nuclear state. So I think, we can probably put that one sort of aside and chalk it up to just stating what President Trump's vision of reality is, that they have nuclear weapons. But there have been a number of official statements from the new administration about the determination of President Trump to continue to pursue denuclearization of the DPRK. And then I think we saw today or yesterday, a blast from North Korea on that topic. And also in response to the trilateral statement coming out of Munich about continuing joint exercises, continuing determination to denuclearize North Korea. Chelsea, what do you wrote a great paper for our process in our Korean Peninsula Emerging Leaders about a North Korea policy review. How do you look at the dynamics now with North Korea on the Korean Peninsula, given everything that's happening in the region and with the US and ROK politics?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that there will be some opportunities for communication with the DPRK, between the DPRK and the US, or maybe even more signals from the US for negotiations. But I think that the bar for negotiation compared with 2018, 2019 will be much higher. And I predict that talks between the US and North Korea might come at the expense of South Korea. So as Susan has mentioned, I believe the Trump administration has shown a bit of interest in rekindling negotiations and talks and engagement with North Korea. There's the appointment of a special envoy. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth, in a written statement, did talk about North Korea as a nuclear power. And even if that was a bit of a faux pas, I think even expressing that stance, it signals a potential change in the starting point for discussions with North Korea. That being said, I do think that it's important to look at how the Trump administration might go about that and might sideline South Korea. And a great template, I think, would be to look at how Russia-US relations are shifting when it comes to the Ukraine war. We saw recently that Trump officials, US officials, and Russian officials met in Saudi Arabia to discuss, among other things, the end of the Ukraine war, completely sidelining Ukraine, our NATO allies, European allies. And South Korea and North Korea are technically still at war. And so there is a possibility that if talks were to come back up, looking at how Ukraine is being dealt with, there's a possibility South Korea could be set aside and put to the sideline. And I think that does not bode well for the US-ROK relationship, for regional stability. And I understand that Korea is going through a lot of domestic political turmoil right now. So we're in a bit of a holding pattern, but talks might come at the expense of Korea. And I don't think that's great for regional stability.
Caroline, I mean, how will President Trump get Kim Jong-un to talk?
So yes, I think Trump can and should present this as a new opportunity, even though the last time Trump and Kim met in Hanoi, talks collapsed, and that first administration under Trump did end with disappointment. Bob Carlin wrote an excellent article in Foreign Policy, kind of detailing how you can see the relationship, maybe the trust deteriorates in the letters written between Kim and Trump under Trump's first administration. But we had a four years off. Trump has come back, reorganized with different policies. So I think the Trump administration should present this as a new opportunity. Time has passed. We can talk about a new issue. In my paper, I wrote about the need for talks on nuclear security. The Trump administration could frame this as not the North Korean nuclear program being a problem on the Korean Peninsula, but as an opportunity to bring North Korea into the international community on international nuclear safety standards. That's one area for opportunity, and I think if the Trump administration can frame it properly, Trump can write a personal letter to Kim. If framed properly, I think talks can restart.
Well, let me bring in Eric here for a minute. Eric Danielson is a MA candidate at the Swedish Defense University, and he is a previous also researcher at CSIS in the Korea chair, and also has attended Kim Il-sung University and wrote a paper on sort of diplomatic relations, how diplomatic relations are handled currently between the U.S. and North Korea via the Swedish protecting power, the Swedish embassy in Pyongyang. But Eric, do you have anything to add here on what enticements might be mooted to try to get talks started again? I mean, Donald Trump seems to be quite confident that he can, pick up the phone and call Kim Jong-un and get things back on track and pick up where we left off. But do you have any thoughts on how that might be facilitated or how that might work out?
Yeah, thank you, Susan. Unfortunately, I'm quite pessimistic now. Really, it's only up to Kim Jong-un and Trump to decide if they want to talk. And the consensus is that after Hanoi, Kim Jong-un was burned and he doesn't really want to engage with the US. And now he's in such a great position of power. He has support from Russia, both financially, militarily, and due to great power rivalry between the US and China. Like, there's really no need for Kim Jong-un to, come to the negotiating table. So I think if the US is really serious about engaging with Kim Jong-un, it's important to communicate to him through all available channels of communication. So New York, the Swedish embassy in Pyongyang, the Intel channel, and pretty much make sure that at the next State Affairs Commission meeting that you have Kim Jong-un hearing from multiple parties of the US interest to engage and communicate with him.
Great, thank you. Yaron, how are you seeing this, the issue of kind of DPRK US relations? Is there talk in Seoul of the worries about kind of Korea being left out, or what other kinds of aspects of this discussion are being considered in Seoul at the moment?
Well, I don't really throw a cold war on this discussion, but while it's true that there were attempts at a peace deal between President Trump and Kim Jong-un, the failed Hanoi summit pushed North Korea back to a hardline stance, strengthening its ties to Russia and making the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula nearly impossible, I dare to say.
Mm-hmm.
So given that a peaceful deal were previously attempted among former President Moon Jae-in and President Trump and Kim Jong-un, let's say Democratic Party wins the upcoming election after impeachment, even if such an initiative were undertaken, its prospects would be considerably diminished in light of the lessons learned from the Hanoi summit. So I strongly believe that we must fundamentally begin with the assumption that the complete denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula has become an even more challenging objective now. That's my opinion.
Yeah, I think, I mean, it's interesting that President Trump seems to think that he can pick up where he left off, even kind of stating that denuclearization of the DPRK is the objective, which is a little bit surprising, and the responses from North Korea don't really seem to be indicating very much receptivity to that. So we'll have to see. I think it. You know, it's probably, fortunately for the ROK domestic political situation, lack of clarity, it's probably the case that this issue will not move to the front burner for the Trump administration still for quite some time. But Kathy, I want to bring Kathy Kong in here. She is a PhD candidate at Sofia University in Bulgaria, but she's had a lot of experience also looking at the Korean peace process and focusing on the soft power aspects. She wrote a paper on Korean soft power in the North-South issue for us in our emerging leaders process. But Kathy, I'd like to bring you in on this question about sort of what's going on between the U.S. and North Korea, and how you see. I know it's 2 a.m. for you there, so we will, you know, be very gentle in surprising you with questions, but I'd love to get your thoughts on how you're seeing this U.S. DPRK dance unfold.
Yes, thank you, Susan, for the understanding, and I hope, yes, my answer is as logical as possible. Yeah, so personally, as a person who is currently in Europe, what I yeah, my observations are related to the US DPRK through the European lens would be that yeah, currently Europe is very so to say scared, maybe. I don't know if that's the right word, but let's say it's scared that Trump is yeah, trying to decouple from the European partners. And from that point of view, also North Korea, as Gary mentioned, is getting more closer and closer to Russia. So from this point of view, I think that we can expect to see more and more complication, not only on the side of South Korea, US DPRK, but also on the side of Europe, US and DPRK via vis-a-vis Russia. Yeah, so I think also the war in Ukraine is related to this. So yeah, in my opinion, we have a long way to go.
Yeah, I think that is it's very good to bring in the European perspective, and we certainly heard a lot about that over the weekend. Another thing that was mentioned, though, in the trilateral statement from the Munich Security Conference over the weekend was this idea of increased trilateral military exercises in terms of deterrence. And here I'd like to bring in Jinwon Lee. She's a PhD candidate at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign in political science. And she was a researcher at the Institute of Foreign Affairs and National Security at the Korean National Diplomatic Academy previously, and also did research at the Korea Institute for National Unification. And I know, Jinwon, you've looked at this question of sort of exercises, how, you know, the exercises play on the issue of DPRK deterrence. But do you have any thoughts on this issue of, you know, how things are unfolding between the U.S. and DPRK and Korea's role, and the role of other regional partners, Japan, China, et cetera, in this diplomatic effort?
Yeah, thank you for providing this chances to talk about my opinions. As my paper mentions that I suggested we need to, the both sides, the US and South Korea, need to continue those extended deterrences related exercise, even though those each administration changes. Although the impeachment, due to the impeachment, those NCG meeting was delayed, but it was resumed and rescheduled and conducted in January 10th. Though that is before those Trump administrations start. But I think that this conservative group and table exercise, that is very cost-effective way of increasing credibility between those in those extended deterrences setting. So even for the Trump administrations, I think that could be this conducting this types of extended deterrences related exercise could be one of the good options to maintaining credibility of those US ROK alliances at the same time saving some of the cost as well. But for those trilateral exercises, as we're doing right now, we can search more chances to do like US, Japan, and ROK exercise, but we need to see that for those, how does the new South Korean government can take actions and what kind of exercise could be conducting. I mean, to what extent the military exercise those three countries can be involved in. That is my impressions.
Great. No, thanks. I wonder if anyone thinks that it's an advantage for the South Korean government to be, vis-a-vis the Trump administration, to be in kind of a holding pattern and to be delayed. Does it give any kind of advantage to South Korea that they can sit and watch how other countries are dealing? We haven't mentioned, the trade issues between Asian partners and the Trump administration, or European partners and the Trump administration, although Kathy, I think you mentioned the decoupling aspect. But trade is going to be a big issue, I think, between the US and ROK. And I wonder if on that particular score, it's not maybe to some advantage to be a kind of late to the game, because then you can sort of see what's happening with other parties. Or does anyone have any thoughts about? I know when the National Assembly delegation was in town last week, they were quite concerned about the various economic measures and wanted to understand better what could be done, what the ROK could do to try to satisfy some of the concerns of the Trump administration. I don't know, Chelsea, do you want to take a crack at that?
Oh, absolutely. I think the timing question is tricky. In some instances, it might be a secret boon that South Korea is kind of going through a bit of some turmoil now. So it's not at the top of Trump's list of things to do, but there's also missing the timing, and that might, as time goes on, Trump might be solidifying, the administration might be solidifying its approach to how it handles its relationships with its allies. And I mean, in the case of Korea, what's particularly tragic is that over the past few years, we've really seen an expansion of what the US-ROK relationship is. It went from a security partnership to an actual true partnership on multiple fronts, economic, technological. And so as the US is closing itself off, levying these tariffs with no reprieve for any of its allies, I'm worried that we might be driving our allies to our adversaries in that case, or on a positive spin, there might be more consolidation regionally, trying to I guess decouple from the United States and protect against the negative effects of the current administration's economic policy. But we'll just have to see, and we'll have to wait and see for Korea.
Yeah, and I would very much like to bring Emma in on this because Emma is a senior program officer at the Asian Society Policy Institute there in New York, and she works on issues relating to East and Southeast Asia. She's been a junior scholars fellow with the Korean Ministry of Foreign Affairs and spent a lot of time looking at the US-ROK alliance and Korean Peninsula affairs. And Emma, you for our emerging leaders process. You know, took up this issue of Korea's role really in the larger Asia Pacific region and whether or not it should take a more active role in the so-called quadrilateral security arrangements with Australia, Japan, India, and the US. But looking at the regional picture, and you know, we want to sort of get a feel, I think, for how Korea is feeling its way in the region at this point, even though it is a little bit distracted right now with its domestic situation. But I think, you know, there's a lot of talk about China in Korea and how Korea should navigate its relations between the U.S. and China, given the strategic competition between those two. And there are also, I guess, there was a trilateral China-Japan-Korea summit in Busan last year. I think it was Busan. So how do you think about Korea in the region? You know, they've tried to really amplify in recent years this kind of Southeast Asian push to get more influence and more connections with Southeast Asia, to try to diversify away from the big relationships that they've had in the past, especially with China. How do you, Emma, see that unfolding, and what kind of future do you think could unfold there?
Well, that's a lot to tackle there.
I know.
I think South Korea has worked hard to try to balance its relationship with both the United States and China. It has a great close security alliance with the United States, but that's also evolved over the past few years, as Chelsea's touched on. And they do a great deal of trade and investment with China. However, all of the relationships have changed. South Korea's economy has vulnerabilities, and South Korean companies have been working to find new export markets since the first Trump administration. And likely this will continue to change. I think in the back of a lot of South Koreans' mind is the reaction that China had to the THAAD missile deployment in 2016 and 2017 that resulted in trade retaliation, travel restrictions, and hurt a lot of South Korean businesses that were operating in China. For this paper, I did recommend that South Korea begin working with the Quad at the working group level. I think there is this feeling of uncertainty in the United States right now with their role in multilateral and minilateral institutions. And now is a really good time for South Korea to become more involved with the other members of Quad, which, as Susan mentioned, is comprised of the United States, Japan, Australia, and India. And in particular, in areas where maybe the US is withdrawing from, like climate, but also health, infrastructure, space, critical and emerging technologies. And I see this as not only a way for South Korea to help build its image, but to allow the resources, especially if it's in areas that South Korea is already investing in or contributing to, like in Southeast Asia. But I also think it would help create better unity among the members of Quad to continue these efforts, and could have a stronger impact through multilaterals and minilaterals than maybe addressed bilaterally, or if the United States pulls support, at least the other countries can continue the momentum.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting that you mentioned sort of Korea to be involved with the Quad, even if the US pulls back from the Quad. And I guess, I mean, that'll be a real test of how far the Quad has come, is, you know, can it continue and do things that have been set out in its sort of various working groups, even if the US pulls out. But I would note that, you know, the first meeting that the new Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, did the day after he was confirmed in his office in Washington was a Quad ministerial with the other foreign ministers of the Quad. So at least at the State Department, it seems like a number of these minilaterals that were really some of them were actually even first developed in the or conceived in the first Trump administration, but they were really built out in the Biden administration. And it seems like a number of those are set to continue. I mean, we should talk about the U.S.-Japan ROK collaboration and the potential for that. Maybe Yaren, you know, we just have this trilateral. There seems to be a big effort by all parties to say, you know, we're going to keep this going. What do you make of this?
Well, to be honestly, I think I feel like that I keep playing devil's advocate in this discussion. To make an excuse by myself, in advance, I was the one of us to suggest, emphasize the importance of establishing trilateral cooperation and increasing the relationship with the United States and increasing our military capabilities for South Korea. But today, the period during which I drafted my research paper was during President Biden's administration. I mean, this time when trilateral relations appeared comparatively promising. So current circumstances may differ somewhat. Especially, it seems unlikely the President Trump will directly intervene in the Taiwan Strait crisis. And also, unless South Korea increase the deposit for the military alliance or USFK, there's still a possibility to withdraw the USFK. So it could be more challenging to compare the previously time. And also regarding the trilateral relations itself, if we assume that President Yoon is impeached and the Democratic Party secures a victory in the next presidential election, I would say there is little room for optimism. Firstly, President Biden, who is the key figure in these negotiations, and also he is a step down, and also President Yoon had to make considerable concessions to draw out this agreement. However, these key actors are not out of the picture, and given the Democratic Party's long-standing anti-pro-Japanese stance, it is unlikely that any further progress can be anticipated at this point. Really, honestly.
That's interesting that you say that, because it seems like a lot of the interlocutors from Korea on the official side are trying to reassure people that the trilateral cooperation will continue. So I don't know if anyone else has thoughts on that, but I wanted to come back to the issue you raised about Taiwan, because that was an area that was actually very much highlighted in the trilateral statement that was issued over the weekend, and I was a bit actually surprised that the language was as extensive and as kind of hard-hitting as it was, because I don't think normally that Korea, you know, likes to really raise the issue of Taiwan in such a public and a kind of a forceful way. So I wonder if anyone has any insights or perspectives on, you know, is that just a function of the fact that things are not, you know, there's a lot of uncertainty in Korea, and so for a meeting like this, you know, there's just not a lot of forethought being given, or is this kind of the new position of, you know, in a US, Japan, Korea format to press really hard on the Taiwan issue? So I don't know. Kathy, you were nodding your head. Do you want to come in on this issue? Or Yaren, you wrote your paper on the Taiwan contingency and Korea's position on that. So feel free to say anything if anyone wants to come in on this, and if you're thinking that this is going to be kind of continue in this vein, or is this just a kind of a temporary first stab at a meeting statement kind of thing?
Oh.
Go ahead,
Yaren, if I could
Chelsea.
jump
Yeah.
in. I actually wanted to speak a bit to Yaren's point about US ROK Japan collaboration, and some things that might be different, including the fact that the US is now pursuing its relationships very transactionally. I think that changes the tenor of what that trilateral partnership has looked like since the Biden administration. And what I mean by that, Yaren, you mentioned USFK withdrawals as well, but as soon as Trump asks for a certain concession and doesn't get it, we might find that trilateral relationship gone. Also with the, there's a new administration in Japan, and South Korea still, we're not really sure where they're going to be. I think Trump is very personality driven as well. So we don't know who's going to be where and how they'll get along. And I think that will actually dictate a lot of what we'll see moving forward with the trilateral relationship. And when it comes to Taiwan, I'm thinking more on the US's side, and whether the US is still backing Taiwan and what that means for stability in the region and the Taiwan Strait. I saw recently that the US State Department deleted a key phrase in its fact sheet on US-Taiwan relations. Previously, it was stated that the US does not support Taiwanese independence, which has been our longstanding view, but that has been deleted, obviously inflaming tensions with Beijing. And personally, I see that rather than being supportive of Taiwanese independence is more of a dig at China. And so I'm not sure if US support for Taiwan will be automatic. It would still be transactional, and that uncertain backing and support of Taiwanese independence actually increases instability in the region. And so I'm not sure what that would mean for Korea and Japan, but if the US is changing its stances or not being very clear on whether it would support Taiwan, I think that increases instability in the region.
Well, that's a great point, Chelsea. I mean, I was going to ask a last question about your recommendations for improving stability on the Korean Peninsula and in the region. But first, I want to go to the audience and sort of query them for their questions. We do have a couple of questions already in the Q&A box, but if people who are attending would care to ask any questions, please go ahead and put those in the Q&A box. And we have a question from Arush Gomraki about whether or not South Korea could be included in AUKUS. And whether that would help to improve, ROK sort of deterrence against North Korea and try to help assuage the concerns in the ROK about, nuclear weapons, I guess, is the question. So that's one question about AUKUS. And maybe, Yaren, I would turn to you for that, since you've had the surface warfare experience. But we also have a question from Andrew Yo, who's been one of our mentors. Thank you, Andrew. And he just wants to say congratulations to all of you for finishing your papers, and he looks forward to reading them. But let's go to Yaren, to you for this question about AUKUS. What do you think?
Sorry. Actually, I repeating my position as devil's advocate. I don't think South Korea will engage in AUKUS directly. South Korea doesn't have the capacity to engage in additional alliance in addition to the existing corporations alliance, like bilateral relations with the US and trilateral with the US and Japan. So in terms of the AUKUS, I don't think they directly engaged in this cooperation, but South Korean military can partially participate in the military combined exercise or something else. And also, I can't add my opinion to increase the cooperation to secure the stability, regional stability around the Korean Peninsula or extensively to the East Asia or Taiwan Strait. We can do military combined exercise in the Taiwan Strait or South China Sea to secure the stability in that region. Also, because we Australia and Japan, Korea, and some degree with the US, they all rely on the trade maritime route through the South China Sea and the Taiwan Strait, which can be a good signal for all of them to get together and to increase our allyship.
So that's very interesting. I think what you're implying there, Yeren, in saying that basically South Korea doesn't have the capacity to really expand a lot of its alliance kind of connections, exercises beyond the Korean Peninsula, because basically it has a very real kind of job and task to do on a daily basis on the Korean Peninsula, defending against the threat from North Korea, which is what we often or almost always hear from our ROK partners when somebody raises a question about will they contribute to this, will they contribute to that, and most often what the issue that comes up is the Taiwan contingency, although I suppose it could also be something in the South China Sea. But I guess I just thinking about that, about the preoccupation of South Korea and South Korean military with North Korea in working with USFK on that threat. How does the consideration of the evolution of sort of Trump's transactionalism impact in any way the thinking in the ROK about the defense with North Korea, do you think? Does anyone have any thoughts on that? Eric, do you want to chime in on sort of how the threat from the DPRK looks different or not from South Korea at this point, given Trump, given Russia, given everything?
Well, it's like as time progresses, like the North Koreans have been able to improve both the quality and quantity of both their nuclear forces and conventional forces now. So their military capabilities are increasing and therefore making South Korea more insecure. But to tie on to the Taiwan Strait contingency, I think one question we should be asking ourselves is what role would North Korea play in that? Like they've proven now with the support for Russia and their war against Ukraine that the North Koreans are willing to send materiel and troops abroad to help a strategic partner achieve their political goals abroad. And, there was a Korean communist contingent that supported the Chinese during the civil war against the nationalists. So I would not be surprised that if that North Korea would be willing to support China in a potential Taiwanese crisis in the future. And I think that's something we should be looking at more.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense to me too. I guess well, we have another question from the audience here, which is, why does the group think that Kim Jong-un would have to be persuaded to meet again? So this person thinks it's an anonymous attendee, so I'm not sure who, but that the signals coming from Pyongyang indicate that he will see an opportunity, given Trump's sort of overtures. And also, I understand the concern about the U.S. engaging the North without the South, but hasn't that been the norm? So that's a great question. Has it been the norm that the U.S. has engaged the North Koreans without the South? What is the thinking on that? And then I'm going to go back to Arash Gomraki's question, because his question was about nuclear submarines and whether or not that can serve as enough of a deterrent to prevent South Korea from proliferating and getting its own indigenous nuclear weapon. But let's take this question about Kim Jong-un first. Does anyone want to take that on?
I think
Caroline,
I can.
go ahead.
I don't know if I have the best answer, but I'll make a few comments. To his first point, I think the reason why the group is quite pessimistic is because of the deterioration of U.S. North Korea relations after the collapse of the Hanoi summit. The US and North Korea tried to meet again in Stockholm in October of 2019, but that also had no results, and relations were quite poor since then. And then nothing happened under Biden. So I think, and as I think Eric made the point too, North Korea has become quite close with Russia, possibly easing some of its economic problems, which is what we believe ultimately motivates North Korea to negotiate with the US. I will also point out that there's two recent articles by William Brown and Rudiger Frank that say they can't find very clear evidence of how much economic support Russia has provided to North Korea in response to their military support in Ukraine. It must be there. We all know it must be there, but we don't know how Russia is paying North Korea and what an impact that has had on the economy. Those are two North Korea experts and economists who can't find clear evidence of that. And then, yeah, I think it has been the norm that U.S. engages the North separately with the South. The concern there is that North and South Korea relations also have many concerns, and separate but related concerns, that if U.S.-North Korea relations resolve their own problems between themselves, then there's going to be this automatic expectation that South Korea no longer has a problem with North Korea. That's not entirely fair. So I think a lot of people in the pro-engagement community and the pro-peace on the Korean Peninsula community want to see collaboration between all three so that no one's issues are sidelined, and that this is a problem that's solved while there is dialogue, and not just U.S.-North Korea relations or problems are solved and just leaving South Korea's concerns out of it. So hopefully that addresses some of the questions.
I mean, there's also the issue of the North Korean negotiators and regime being masters at playing parties off one another in order to prolong the negotiations. We had one of our Korean Peninsula emerging leaders from South Africa, Ian. He couldn't be here with us tonight, but he wrote a paper on North Korea's excellent skills at delaying negotiations. And one of the ways that we've seen over the many decades of North Korean negotiations them do that is to play different parties off one another in order to delay. And all the, I mean, Russia, China, North Korea, I mean, Russia, China, South Korea, US, Japan, all included. So I think that would be another angle in answer to that question. Does anyone want to take up this question of how big a desire? I'm hearing a lot more about this issue now than I've ever heard before. South Korean politicians continually talking about South Korea either deploying U.S. nuclear weapons on its soil or getting its indigenous nuclear weapons. And I saw an article just today with a South Korean politician from the Democratic Party commenting that Donald Trump has said that he doesn't understand why South Korea wouldn't want nuclear weapons. So I don't know exactly what has been said behind closed doors, but it's definitely something that keeps coming up again and again and again. And there have been efforts clearly by the U.S. and others to try to satisfy South Korea on the issue of extended deterrence, but nevertheless, this issue seems to keep coming up. Now, Ashok Arash's question was about whether or not a U.S., Australian, and UK effort to provide nuclear submarine technology to South Korea would somehow be a solution to this, which I think is pretty, as Yaron would say, you know, she's probably a devil's advocate on this too, but would be pretty far down the road. But does anyone have any thoughts on that US-UK provision of nuclear sub technology to put the kibosh on this nuclear Yeah, go ahead, Jinwan.
So far we've been discussed the intra-alliances relationship between the South Korea and the US and how to increase the credibility of those extended deterrences. I think that those questions from the audiences are so from that types of relationships between those as US and South Korea, and how can we increase those credibility between the two. But to understand the South Koreans' perspective, it is quite necessary to understand its fear from North Korea's nuclear threat. So for the South Korean, as long as those North Korea's nuclear threat is very visible, and that is then they need a certain types of extended deterrences, and that could be quite the level of the extended deterrences could be very different depending on the level of threat of the North Korea. So for those questions that to what extent those US's extended nuclear deterrences could be enough for the South Korean, that could be a questions about what kind of the threat from the North Korea, what kind of nuclear threat from the North Korea the South Korean has been experiences. So as long as there's a North Korean nuclear threat exists, South Koreans also can think about various types of alternative options. Possibly, those like, I'm not in the position to support those like indigenous weapons, but some may think that these types of nuclear technologies support from the allies could be one of the options to increase those credibility.
And Yaren, I want you to come in on this too, and then I have one more question.
Oh, yes, to build up on Jinwan's opinion, I'd like to say this question should involve considering many factors. Also, I would say the transfer of nuclear submarine technology and the development of independent nuclear weapon doesn't necessarily go hand in hand. And the key issue is just whether the South Korean government will decide to pursue our own independent nuclear weapons or not. Also, it should be considered by this decision would be acceptable under the non-proliferation regime because we are one of the members of that, and also how much the extent the United States will approve for South Korea to have nuclear own weapons.
Thank you very much for that. So last question from the audience, and then we're going to close out. We have a question from Don Kirk, who's, I think he's trying to understand more about why South Korea would be reluctant to be involved in a Taiwan contingency. And then the question is really about the use of U.S. air bases in South Korea for flying U.S. warplanes in a Taiwan contingency. So maybe Yaren, that'll come back to you as well, just very quickly, and then we'll close out.
Oh, okay. I think it might be a very practical answer, but I would answer that it depends on which party is in power, as the two parties clearly pursue different foreign policy priorities. So if the Democratic Party is in power, they will undoubtedly pay more attention to China's interests as the previous Moon's administration did. So it's more likely to continue employing hedging strategy between the US and China. But in the opposition, if Yoon keeps in power, then might be he's more care about the US side rather than China. So it might be more bold action could be done.
And I think on the question about use of bases, if we got to the point of a Taiwan contingency, I think at the end of the day, the U.S. would do what it felt like it had to do, probably with its own warplanes. And I think people in USFK and in the Korean military know that, but they don't want to actually have to talk, very, very much out loud about it, right? And that's what basically I think we've discussed previously privately in our group, and that we've heard also from some in South Korea. So I think we hope that we don't get to that point so that we don't have to actually find out, but the don't ask, don't tell seems to be kind of the watchword for the moment on that. There are a couple of other questions. I'm sorry we couldn't get to all of them, but we're right at time. And I really want to thank our audience for participating so actively, and also for the many of you that have helped and supported us in this process of our third cohort of Korean Peninsula Emerging Leaders. I really want to thank you. Thanks to all of you for being with us, even people in Europe in the middle of the night and from Seoul early in the morning, and everyone in the US. Thanks so much for being with us, and had a great time talking to everyone, and hope to see you all again soon. Keep up the great work.